Right. Hello, everyone. So today we're continuing our journey through the heart of grief. And today we've got a lovely, lovely lady from Melbourne, Australia, who she and her husband, Tony, are part of our chiropractic family. And so we have a long story to tell about a very special person. And this is Tiffani Clingin. Hello, Tiffani. And her background is in social work and family therapy and applied positive psychology. But today we're kind of talking a little bit about that journey from the loss of a child, which is a very difficult thing for any parent to imagine, let alone experience. So Tiffani, I was going to ask you maybe to share a story about Monte.
It's a difficult question to answer because he was so colourful and artistic and intelligent. But probably one of my favourite qualities about him was that he was very, very empathic and adoring. I've got 3 children. One's my youngest, and I'm very fortunate to be loved by all of them. And but I have never come across a person as adoring as Monte. And we went to a conference one weekend down in Tasmania, and Monte came with his older sister. And Tony and I were at a fancy dinner in the evening, and Mont and Jin were in the hotel room. And I got up to go to the bathroom and came back to the table, and he'd left a note on my dinner plate. We were sitting with dignitaries at this chiropractic conference, and I always prefer to be with the kids or with the naughty people, you know. But Mont had snuck downstairs and crawled through the restaurant and the function room and left a note on my plate saying, "Meet me in the foyer at 8 o'clock. Love, your secret admirer." And so then I went into the foyer of the hotel at 8, and he was waiting with a flower in between his teeth and this little bag of heart-shaped chocolates. And he would have been about 12 at the time, but he stayed like that actually. He died when he was 17. He died last year, but he stayed like that, and I love that about him very much. And he wasn't just like that with me. He was like that with a lot of people. On Valentine's Day, he would come out of school with armfuls of presents. And I remember one time I said to him, I said, "Do all of the boys get that many gifts, Monte?" I said, "It's an extraordinary amount of chocolates and treats." And he said, No, Mum, just me." And I said, "What's your secret, mate? What is it about you that helps you stand out like that?" And he said, "I know we should just be nice to the girls." He said, "And if they've got a moustache, we should never mention it." So he was just lovely and thoughtful, and he would go into school early as a teenager and make cups of tea for his favourite teachers, but never in this way of I don't know how to describe it. I asked him about it one day. I said, "Tell me why you do that." And he said, "Young people," he said, "we forget that teachers are people too." So that's what I liked about him the most, was his empathy and kindness. I've not met another human like him in that way.
Yeah. And that's unusual for a teenage boy as well, like going into those years.
Yeah. He used to say, "Oh, I'm inviting my friends over so they can see how lovely you are." Whereas my others, when they were teenagers, just wanted me out of the way, like normal teenagers, you know. But he wasn't. He was different, which I really, really treasured then and still treasure now. Yeah.
Now it's been a year.
Yeah.
And from where you began through the journey, it might be, if you don't mind telling a bit of his story of what happened that led to him.
He came out as same-sex attracted when he was about 15, and we'd always loved him, but never more than we did in that moment, because we could see how vulnerable he felt about that. And but while he was coming to terms with that, he went on a date and was drugged and raped when he was about 15 by an older peer, and he naturally struggled a lot afterwards. It shook his confidence and just his all-round faith in life, I think. And then lockdowns happened shortly after, so we'd connected him.
Really strict, wasn't it? It was like military.
Melbourne, we had the longest lockdowns in the world, and I think that made it particularly difficult for him, and his mental health deteriorated over time and bounced in and out of various services. But in that a final week of his life, we presented to hospital 3 times and he was turned away. At one point, because we could just see the decline, he said to them, he said, I'm not safe. He said, I feel like my brain's breaking and I can't enact a safety plan. I need help. He said, I'm asking for help and being turned away. And I said to them, if I fall to my knees and beg, will you please help us? And we were turned away. And just hours before he died, we presented again. And I said to 2 workers, I said, if he was bitten by a shark, you wouldn't send us away. And I said, he's experiencing the mental health equivalent of a shark bite. And he died hours later. And that's all being investigated. You know, we've reported all of the things that happened to an organisation called Safer Care Victoria, which oversees health service in the state that we live in. But of course it won't bring Monty back, but we'll do anything and everything we can to prevent other losses like his from occurring again. And the region that we live in has one of the highest suicide rates in the country, and all of us are mandated to go to hospitals in our region, and watching what happened with Mont. If that's happening with other people, I'd say it's contributing significantly to the loss of life. And we know that when people die by suicide, about half of them ask for help in the days and weeks before they die. And Monty was definitely one of those people. And the fact that he was help seeking so steadily and diligently makes his loss even much harder to come to terms with. I think, I don't know, but it's the preventability of his death weighs very heavily for all of us that love him.
It's a massive thing, isn't it? What do you think when he was asking for help? I guess because I don't understand how the system works.
Yeah.
Is that for someone to be there with him around the clock, or to?
Yeah, I think my opinion of him, because I work in mental health, was that he needed to be hospitalised and observed, and he was taking medication, but he felt that the medication was breaking his brain, in his words, and so I think he needed to be taken off the medication and supervised, and have really good talk therapy face to face with people, not behind a mask. And but yeah, in that acute period, he actually needed to be in hospital.
Yeah, it's a big thing, especially when you're dealing with some of the medications as well, because they're not easy to just come off for anybody. So they need real help to do that. So
yes, he did. He needed very intense care at that point in time, and then of course to be returned to community care after, and approach things differently. But at that very pointy end, for him, he needed to be hospitalised. He knew it, and we knew it.
Yeah.
And the organisations, certainly in our state, that investigate losses like Monty's, know absolutely that the 2 biggest risk factors when people present for care are that workers underestimate risk and they ignore the voices of families. And that's certainly what happened with Mont.
And that's huge failing, because to be going and going and going, and especially in those final few hours, and then be turned away. And we've had the same issue here with people who, parents were so desperate.
Yeah.
turned away from the hospital, and especially like either through the lockdowns or just, I guess, the hospitals never really came out of lockdown. Even now there's some insane policies that are still in place that aren't helping people at all.
That's right.
And parents are desperate for help for their children. So because we've had
it's
very high
it's
rates
interesting.
here too.
Yeah, I don't know what happened where you are, but we had like COVID accommodation available within weeks of the pandemic starting, it's fascinating because if we can create massive change and respond very swiftly to a crisis like COVID, it demonstrates to me that we can respond to other crises as well.
Exactly. Yeah. How true is that? And actually somebody had made another comment saying, isn't it interesting that within a short period of time, within weeks, even some of the vaccines went around the world, but still can't manage to get clean water and food to people.
Yes.
So so where there's a will, there's a way, isn't it?
I agree. Yeah.
It's a little bit shocking. So what happened in the days after that then for you?
It was horrific. It's hard. It's very hard to articulate. He died at home, and he was taken to be with the coroner, and then in partnership, we actually had a couple of different funeral services come to the house, and there's one that's a natural funeral service, and their approach resonated for us as a family. So we actually brought Monty back here, and as confronting as it was probably a really important part of those early stages of our grief. And I got to sleep beside him and hold him and tell him I was sorry and that I'll miss him. And we prepared his body ourselves, and just a lot of those rituals that I don't know what it's like where you live, but over here a lot of those rituals are removed from families. But we were, with encouragement from the funeral director, we were able to do a lot of that with Monty and for Monty, and we dressed him and prepared him and took tender care of him, and that felt very important, and I'm incredibly glad we did that. And I think there should be more of that available for people. And it was very important for Mont's older siblings to be involved in those processes as well, because of course we needed to tell them. And we live in the centre of our township, and there were 8 emergency vehicles at our house when Mont died. So probably the most pressing issue in those early hours after Mo died was to let his siblings know without them hearing through other people. So I waited with Mont's body for the coroner to come, and my husband went to tell Virginia, and I telephoned Oliver. He lives interstate, and so I needed to tell Ollie by phone. And on the day that Monty died, the borders were closing that evening at 6 o'clock. So it was a rush for Oliver to get through those border closures. I'm hopeful and I'm confident and hopeful we would have got him through anyway. But there was a lot of turmoil at that time across the state. And so, in those early hours, it was about letting them know and bringing them home. And then in those days and early weeks, it was about caring for Monty and preparing those rituals for the funeral, and trying to navigate the trauma and horror of the loss of him. And it was interesting. I was doing my master's at the time in positive psychology, and also I work in mental health. So I decided in those early days that I would take 8 weeks off practice. I didn't know if I would ever practice again, actually. And but I was also at the tail end of my master's, and I decided I would persevere with that. I spoke to one of the professors at the uni and just said, if you'll still have me in the program, I've decided that I'd like to stay. And she was very affirming, and I think that was a good decision for me. I was actually reflecting on it today when I knew we'd be speaking. I was thinking, oh, what was useful, what's been useful for me and or for my family. And I think engaging in staying connected with my cohort of peers and persevering with that. I would literally put we had Mont cremated, and I would rest his ashes on my lap and wrote my capstone paper, it's called. And I'm glad that I did that. I think it gave my brain something to do that wasn't directly about the loss of Mo, because alongside that we were making a lot of reports to the coroner, Safer Care Victoria. We wrote concerns of care letters to the hospital that refused care, and that process was extremely arduous and traumatizing, and still is to this day. It's still not resolved, and the investigations are ongoing. So at the moment, Monty's case is before the prevention unit with the Victorian coroner, and I don't know when we'll know the outcome of their investigation. But I think one of the useful things for me was continuing with the course, even though I felt very tempted to stop it. But I realised that if I withdrew, I'd either miss that opportunity in this lifetime, or I'd go back the following year with a cohort that would be unfamiliar with what we'd been through, and that might be difficult in its own way. And after about 8 weeks, I went back to work. A woman came around. We're very lucky. We're actually still being fed. It's been 14 months since Mont died, and we still get fed a couple of nights a week. And in those early days, we were fed by our community. Up until about 10 months, we were fed most nights of the week, which meant we could get all of the administrative tasks done associated with the loss of Mo, feel our sorrow, that ongoing sorrow about the loss of him, and I could get my master's done. And those things were very, very important. And a woman called around to the house, a client, to deliver a meal, and I walked outside to meet her in the driveway, and she was holding this beautiful food, and she's had a fairly catastrophic health diagnosis, and we were early in our work together. And I said to her, I've decided that I'll have 8 weeks off. I said, but if you need me in that time, you can ring me. And I said to her, and if you would like support to find another worker, I'll partner with you and I'll find you someone good. And she looked me in the eyes and she said, all my life I've waited for a worker like you. And she said, I can wait a little longer. And she said to me, and Tiffani, I'm not afraid of the dark. And it was so tender, it was so sweet. And I walked back inside, I accepted the food, and I walked back inside, and I said to Tony, I think I will go back to practice, even if it's only to work with her. So there was something about her accepting of knowing that I felt so broken, and that she was prepared to work with broken me. And she seemed so unafraid of that. Mm-hmm. And it was a very moving experience for me and our community and all of my clients, because Mont worked in our practice. He worked at our front desk. So they were all grieving for him too, and still are. And the broader community, about 4,000 people attended his funeral. And we're all navigating this catastrophic loss together.
Yeah. God, that's incredibly important. So I'm still even thinking about the idea of how different things would have been for my family and my brother, had we been able to do something natural like that, and to kind of respect those rituals and the enormous emotional resilience that you gain from that closeness and that tenderness. And it's almost like that biblical thing where they washed Jesus's feet, and
that's how it felt.
Yeah. And I mean, that so much of that beauty is lost. It is that expression of love in such a different way.
Yeah, and Moe was born at home, and then so it just felt he was born in our bedroom, and it felt right to bring him back to the house in a less. It was still traumatic, but it wasn't the leaving that he'd had, like the leaving that he had going to the coroner in a van. Like it was just awful. So to bring him back and line the hallways with candles and flowers and love him and kiss him and bathe him was important.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's probably an experience that most people will never have. But
Yeah.
the idea that there are coroners or there are funeral homes like that,
Yeah. Yeah.
that would give such a huge gift to a family.
Yeah. And they really guided us through it. And I was afraid to sleep beside him. I remember feeling really scared. But I'm glad that I did that with their encouragement. And it was just very important to have that time together.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he had a dog, like even the dog, she was fascinating because she wouldn't leave him. She just came and kept vigil beside him as well. And then I watched her and I thought, oh, this is important for the people in his life, but it was also important for her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing too, as somebody so young like that, and involved in the community. And
Yeah.
I remember because my brother's funeral was massive as well. And you just think, God, we're so used to people dying
Yeah.
in their 70s and 80s, and their friendship groups are smaller, and it's
Yeah.
family. And then when you recognize a teenager who's no age tall,
Yeah.
and the far reach of their friendships,
Yeah.
on so many levels and so many ages,
Yeah.
it is quite incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's hard, I think, sometimes I think when I think about it with my brother, that, they're so loved,
Yeah. That's right.
it
Yeah.
wasn't enough.
No, that's such a gap in your family, I imagine, too, Maryellen, isn't it? Like someone's missing from the table forever. And whoever they might have loved too, whoever, it's all the future Kennys as well.
Yeah, it is. It's quite incredible.
Mm.
It's interesting how the universe provides those little highlights to you, like with the lady bringing you some food, the community rallying around bringing food. And again, it's part of that community ritual and a family ritual where people are cared for
Yes.
well beyond
Yeah.
the actual funeral service going on. Sorry, I have to pull my notes. That so much
Yeah.
lost, and it's particularly because so many of us are spread across the world now,
Yes.
that even though in some places there might be a little bit of that going on to a low level,
Yes.
it's lost in so many ways.
I think so too. And we were very fortunate that we have the practice, and we've had it here for about 30 years. It'll be 30 years next year. And so we were very well established, and that has served us well. And even last week, flowers arrived at the office, and with an anonymous note that said, "You're not alone, we love you." It was beautiful. Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, and it's beautiful to have that, because I do think that the more common experience is that everybody's there for the immediate rush in the drama and the unfolding and then the burial.
Yeah.
And then within weeks, everybody vanishes. And I think sometimes part of that is that in the world that we live in, people don't want to talk about death.
Yeah.
Talk
Or
about
they're nervous. I think they're frightened. They're very frightened about what to say. So we have Monty's name badge at the front desk at work still. It sits at the desk. And we bring him up and we talk about him, and we do fundraising in his memory. He liked the food bank. We've got a food bank in town, and he liked that. So we've been, around the anniversary of his death, we collected a lot of food for the food bank, and we'll I wonder if one of the things that has been helpful is our long established position in the community, and also our willingness to share our grief and discuss it and to acknowledge it. And because it was interesting for me when I went back to work, I actually made a mistake. I put on the advice of another chiropractor, actually, I put a social media post up saying I'm returning to work, and it will be helpful for me if we keep the conversations about you, about them. But it was actually, it wasn't right, Maryellen, because they love me. And so they would all come in and sit in front of me, but there was this terribly large elephant in the room. And so we quickly abandoned that idea. And I said to people, it's okay. If you want to, you can ask, you can bring it up. And they'd sit and sort of lean back with relief and say, Tiffani, I want to ask how you are. Yeah. And I would say, I'm utterly heartbroken, but not broken. Mm-hmm. And so I think by giving people permission to step towards such a tragedy, that's been better for us as a family than trying to close those conversations down. And I suspect it's had a positive influence on our lives and our grief too. Even occasionally, if people say clumsy things, we trust in their good intentions. And I think clumsily delivered sentiment is better than no conversation at all.
Yeah, and there's so much truth in that. And I think that idea that you need to lean into it, lean closer, instead of backing away, and I think because I think it's interesting, because it comes across as that professional thing where you kind of leave your private life in a box when you cross over the threshold of the office. And I mean, it's impossible. And there are things you don't want to get into, like deep details, but I think the openness of discussion leads to so much healing on different levels, and for them too, for people who need to kind of say, I'm really sorry.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's love. That's love being enacted, isn't it? And I'm comfortable to say to people, one of the things I'm aware of is that before Mont died, I was mostly happy and sometimes sad. And now I'm mostly sad and sometimes happy. And that might change over time as the years go by, the months and the years. I'm not sure, but I'm okay to share that with people. Because the other thing is too, there are other grieving people in our community. And if I put on a false front, and that's not good. That's not good for my grieving brothers and sisters. And
it's not real.
No, that's right. Yeah, and I don't want to do that to myself, but I also don't want to do that to other grieving people.
Yeah. And what I find interesting about your master's in the applied positive psychology, because I've come across a lot of people that I see who, obviously in practice, people cry on you all the time, but they find a safe space to express, because the rest of the time they have that face on where everything's fine, and actually they become these frozen shell people. And then giving them permission to be real about loss. That there isn't an end point to it. It doesn't mean that you can, you're not just going to walk down the streets crying your eyes out all the time, although you might, and that's okay too. But there has to be some sense of forward motion, of recognizing that you're still here. And that you still have a role to play in, like you're finding, in supporting the other people around you just by being who you are. Being able to openly be grieving. As opposed to, trying to lock it down and, become a shell person. People do that, and it's really hard. And then we see them on the other end of it being sick. And having created all kinds of trauma in their bodies because they haven't felt that they could be real about it, or their time's expired. It's been my husband, partner, brother died 4 years ago. I should be over it by now, so I shouldn't be emotional about it.
Yes.
Who says? Who says that?
Right. Yeah. When does the alarm go off? Right. It's over.
You're done now. Your time is up for grieving. It's like, no, it's not. Yeah. So I don't know. Any advice for families about not necessarily timelines, but I suppose in time, sometimes it's the rawness, isn't it?
Oh, awful. Like those early days. I remember one night I laid on the carpet crying, and I said to Tony, I was wailing, and I said, take me to hospital and tell them to put me in a coma. I said, I can't deal with this level of pain. And so the reason I want to speak to that is especially for people in those early days and weeks, like the horror and the agony, I found utterly overwhelming. And but I think there were some things that have been helpful for us. One is when people offered to support us, we said yes.
Mm-hmm.
So a neighbour of mine, along with a friend from closer to the city, and another woman organised a food train, and we said yes to that. And it went for maybe 3 months, and then one of them contacted me and she said, Tiffani, people are still calling to ask if they can make you a meal. Is it okay if we add another couple of months to the food train? And I said to her, actually, that would be beautiful. So we tried to do that. We tried when people offered to comfort us, we let them. And partly it was out of pure desperation. We actually were and are incredibly traumatized. The intensity of the weight is, or that initial horror, there's a softening somehow I'm noticing. But we really needed people, so we made sure we said yes. And the other thing that I did was, I'm aware of, I reflected on my own personal strengths and looked at how I could use those. So there's the values and action strengths profile that's a very well-known strengths profile in positive psychology that identifies people's greatest character strengths and provides advice and feedback about how to apply those strengths in different situations. And at the top of my strengths profile is love of learning. And so I read a lot of the grief literature, which is something that fits with my strengths profile. It's not what everybody needs to do or will want to do, but it was helpful for me to understand grief intellectually and consider the literature and how I might apply different suggestions. Even just knowing the stages of grief, that first I needed to accept the loss, accept that Monty wasn't going to come in the door, and also allow space for me to feel the pain, the emotional pain that comes with losing him. So the 4 tasks of grief come from Warden. Mm-hmm. And the third one is adjusting to the environment. So I noticed we went to do the grocery shopping on Sunday and I didn't buy fruit for Monty. And that's the first time I haven't bought the fruit. And I suspect that that's a part of that third task of grieving, which is accepting that the making adjustments to the environment. Because initially after he died, I couldn't bear to see the fruit bowl with less fruit in it. Mm-hmm. And so yeah, for me, understanding the task of grieving, because that last task is how do I create an enduring, how do I maintain an enduring connection with Monty and step into this new life. It's not a life that I prefer. It's not a life that I want or chose, but it is the life I have. And how do I maintain this loving connection with a missing child and move into the future? So even just understanding that those were the tasks and then not pressuring myself to tick them off or hurry along them, but having an intellectual awareness was very helpful for me. And the other thing that we did was we allowed ourselves to feel positive emotions. So when something was funny, we laughed. And when we were invited to visit people's homes for a meal, we used a process, we called it leaning in. So whenever we get invited to do something that might generate some positive sensations, we tend to say yes. And we also give ourselves permission to leave if we're overwhelmed or it's not working on that particular day. So on the weekend just gone, I had one of my godchildren turn 21, and we went to her. She had a fancy dress party, and we went to that and we loved it. It was marvelous to celebrate her life. And we yearned for Monty to be there with us, and we cried in the car on the way down, and we cried after. And there were times at the party where we cried, imagining what it would be like if he was there. And that's okay. And in between all of that, we had a really great time. So we have consciously allowed ourselves to feel positive feelings by engaging with things that are likely to create those sensations. And we don't feel bad about that. I work with some grieving families, and particularly since Monty's died, there's been an influx of grieving people into my work. I think they think, oh, she'll understand. And but you know, I understand what it's like to lose Monty as a mother, but I don't know what it's like for you to lose Kenny. And I don't know what it's like for your listeners to manage the grief that they're managing. I can only comment on my relationship with Monty. I don't even know what it's like for Ollie and Jin to lose him, or Tony, because they each had a separate and unique connection with him. But I notice in my work, a number of people have said they feel guilty if they experience positive emotion or do something fun. And I've consciously pushed back against that for me, and I would very much encourage other people to do that too.
I think that's really important because, again, it's the missing is awful.
Yeah.
And but you are the one that's still here.
Yes.
And no amount of misery, no amount of crying, no amount of choosing to be miserable or be engulfed in guilt, engulfed in needing to feel the loss at a level that you did that first day.
Yeah.
That doesn't bring them back.
No. Yeah, I think of it a little bit like the ocean, the grief for me. And sometimes if we visit the sea, it's very calm and peaceful, and it's very fun to play in. And other times it's very rocky and stormy, and that's what grief has been like for me. And when it's rocky and stormy, I try to accept that. And when it's calm, I'm grateful, and we do nice things in between all of that rockiness. And I'm aware one of the beautiful things that Monty did was he was very, as I mentioned earlier in our conversation, he was very affirming and very loving and had incredible empathy. And I'm aware that if he has any awareness of us at all, it would bother him. Our suffering, our sorrow, our despair would rest heavily for him. And so partly out of love for him, I still feel like I'm mothering him, and I don't want to frighten him. So partly my reason for getting on with at least some things is that he'll be worried if I don't. And that's a strong drive of me, whether it's real or imagined, because I actually don't know what happens when we die. I don't. I wish I did. I wish I was one of those people that's absolutely certain, but I'm not. But if he and I are still bonded and connected, which I hope we are, I want to allow him to rest peacefully and not need to worry. Yeah, and I said to him after he's died, you don't need to worry. I'll take care of everything. I love you. I'll look after everyone. I'll take care of everything. Yeah.
I think that connection is important,
Yeah.
because it makes it feel a little less like a whole,
Yes.
a little less endless.
Yeah. Yeah. He and I went for a warm drink every day. We started when he was in grade 1, and we had our last drink hours before he died. And I've kept that up since he died. And so I drive with him every morning. We go and get a drink. I drive with his memory. And it's a nice way of staying connected with that sweet ritual. And it's not unfolding in the way that I liked. I liked it better when we would hold hands and sit side by side. But I'll keep doing that, driving and having a warm drink and reflecting on what he means to us all.
And it's that's a beautiful ritual for memory as well, isn't it? That he's always with
you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing such incredibly personal stories.
Thank you for asking and allowing me to be with you. It's a real privilege.
Thank you. So I will post a few things down below, if you'll allow me to, about where people can find you if they want to kind of love your way. I'm sure many of us over here who know you have already done that and been doing that. And knowing how everything's going for you all down there.
Yeah. And will you be at Edinburgh? Will you be at the lectures next year?
I'd never miss it.
Oh, I'll see you. I'll see you there because we're coming.
You're coming. Fantastic.
Yeah, and our children are coming, so we'll see you there.
Well, look forward to that. Thank you so much for everything and for all your sharing. And my major takeaway with this, from all of it, I think, is the idea that the love isn't enough sometimes to keep them here, but the love doesn't die.
No, I agree. Yeah. And lovely to connect with you. I'm so excited to see you at Edinburgh again and give you a big hug. And to anyone that's listening, especially people that are grieving, my heart's with all of you. And lots of love to everyone.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.